Oberyn recognized the significance of the realm's reaction. He was becoming not just a Dornish prince but a figure of legend, a man who had slain a monster. Such renown carried weight. More importantly, it could attract potential allies, especially among those who had suffered under the Mountain or felt stifled by Lannister rule. And in a city like King's Landing, alliances were everything. Slowly, he began to receive invitations. A minor lord from the Westerlands requested a private audience to discuss certain matters, hinting that he had grievances with the Lannisters. A group of Riverland knights, once loyal to House Tully, made discreet inquiries about meeting with the Red Viper. Even the Tyrells, who outwardly displayed courtesy to House Lannister, showed subtle signs of interest in strengthening ties with Dorne. Oberyn weighed these openings carefully. Each had potential and pitfalls. Forging alliances behind Tywin's back could escalate tensions, but letting these opportunities slip by might mean missing the chance to weaken the Lannisters' grip. He decided to begin cautiously, meeting first with individuals who had the least to lose, knights who had been dispossessed or minor lords who saw no future under Lannister hegemony. In clandestine gatherings at dusk, often in lesser-known corners of the Red Keep or small taverns in the city, Oberyn listened to stories of frustration and injustice. Some claimed Tywin had stripped them of lands or levied heavy taxes. Others swore that Cersei had meddled in their affairs, forcing them into disadvantageous marriages. Oberyn took careful mental notes. He did not promise open rebellion or speak of toppling the crown. He simply made it clear that Dorne was not subservient, that if the time ever came to question the Lannisters' supremacy, House Martell would not stand idle. In parallel, Oberyn cultivated friendships among those whose presence in the Red Keep afforded them special knowledge. He shared wine with certain members of the king's retinue, clever men who disliked their Lannister overlords but were too timid to risk defiance alone. He showed courtesy to stewards and scribes, reminding them that in Dorne, every man's voice was heard in some measure. Before long, little pieces of information trickled his way. Times of Tywin's private meetings, the contents of messages being sent to Casterly Rock, the dispositions of the Gold Cloaks loyal to Cersei, and so on. Oberyn realized that if he was patient and precise, he could sow seeds of doubt, or at least gather the kind of leverage that might force Tywin's hand. Still, Oberyn was not blind to the hazards of this game. He took pains to never repeat the same place of meeting, never arrive alone, and never speak too openly unless he was certain of his companion's loyalty or alignment. He had a small retinue of Dornish guards who accompanied him everywhere, and they knew better than to let him stray out of sight. One evening, he sensed watchers in the shadows, perhaps Lannister informants or even Littlefinger's spies, tailing him through the streets. He led them on a winding route through twisting alleys, eventually slipping free in the lively chaos of a fish market. These cat-and-mouse games were the currency of King's Landing, and Oberyn navigated them with the same grace he displayed on the battlefield. Within a fortnight, a response arrived from Doran Martell. The letter was written in his brother's careful, precise hand, commending Oberyn for his victory and the proof he had wrung out of Gregor. Doran also urged caution, reminding Oberyn that while the Mountain's death was cause for celebration, the Lannisters were still masters at the Red Keep, and the sands of power were ever shifting. He agreed to dispatch a few trusted voices to gather information. In closing, Doran hinted that the time might be approaching when House Martell could demand formal reparations for Elaya's death. Perhaps lands, gold, or even a marriage alliance that would tie Dorne and the crown more evenly. Oberyn smiled at that. Doran, the ever-patient spider, was weaving his own web in Sunspear. The Prince of Dorne was no less cunning than Tywin Lannister, only more deliberate. And so, with the days drifting into weeks, life in King's Landing became a careful dance for Oberyn Martell. He attended feasts at the Red Keep, conversed with lords and ladies, and always made sure to remind them of Dorne's proud independence. He paid his respects to Tommen and observed the boy's earnest but uncertain attempts to rule. He clinked glasses of wine with Marjorie Tyrell, who had a charming smile that masked a shrewd mind. He occasionally crossed paths with Cersei in the corridors, each time exchanging icy courtesies that barely hid the contempt between them. Above it all, Tywin Lannister stood like an imposing statue, controlling the council, the treasury, and the realm's official stance. Oberyn would watch him from a distance, mindful that any direct confrontation would need to be orchestrated carefully. For the moment, Tywin pretended civility, but Oberyn did not doubt that the lion's claws were sharpened behind closed doors. Late one night, Oberyn found himself in a secluded garden near the Red Keep, torches casting wavering light upon the hedges and marble benches. He had received a cryptic summons from none other than Varys, the Master of Whisperers. For a time, Oberyn waited, listening to the chirping of nighttime insects and the distant hum of revelry from the city outside. When Varys finally appeared, it was with his trademark quiet step, wearing soft slippers that made no sound on the gravel path. "Prince Oberyn," Varys greeted him, bowing slightly. "I trust the Red Keep has treated you well since your victory in the yard." Oberyn crossed his arms, regarding the eunuch with guarded curiosity. "I suppose that depends on one's definition of well. If by well you mean constant surveillance and subtle threats, then yes, I'm quite comfortable." Varys's lips curved in a smile, though his eyes remained watchful. "We all live in a nest of vipers here, do we not? Some of them are even rumored to hail from Dorne." He let that jest linger before continuing. "I have heard whisperings that you have been meeting with some of the more disaffected elements in the city. I commend you for your discretion. I have found no evidence that you plan anything rash. Still, I hope you understand that the crown's peace is a fragile thing." Oberyn considered this carefully. Varys was an enigma, a man who claimed to serve the realm itself rather than any one king or faction. "If you have come to advise me against inciting rebellion," Oberyn replied, "you need not worry. I have no interest in seeing the city bathed in blood." Varys dipped his head. "Your concern for the small folk is most heartening. But as you know, Lord Tywin is not quick to forgive those who tarnish his family's honor. Already he has begun to lay the groundwork to neutralize you, perhaps quietly or by undermining your credibility, or worse, by stirring up some scandal that might send you fleeing. He will bide his time, because he believes you have no immediate recourse." Oberyn arched an eyebrow. "And what do you believe, Lord Varys?" "I believe that the greatest threats in the realm are often overlooked until they strike," Varys said softly, letting his gaze drift to the flames of a nearby torch. "I believe that if House Martell and House Lannister reach an impasse, it could reignite the embers of war. And I also believe that eventually, whether by pressure or cunning, Tywin Lannister will try to strike at you. You must decide how you will respond, and whether you will do so alone." The torchlight made shadows dance across Oberyn's face. "Are you offering your help?" Varys offered a cryptic tilt of the head. "I offer information, assistance at times. But my loyalty is to the realm. If there is a path that avoids chaos, I will do what I can to steer events that way. Still, men like Lord Tywin do not relinquish grudges lightly, and men like you do not forget old wounds. That combination rarely ends in peaceful coexistence." Oberyn let out a soft laugh. "I'll consider your counsel. In return, I ask that you keep your ears open for any sign of direct aggression. If an assassin is hired, or a plot to implicate me in some conspiracy arises, I would appreciate advance warning." Varys spread his hands wide, a gesture of polite acceptance. "I shall do what I can. One piece of unsolicited advice, if I may: do not let your victory over the mountain lull you into complacency. You survived that duel by your skill and your anger. Politics requires a different arsenal. Be mindful of your daughters, your paramour, your brother. Tywin knows that a man's loved ones can be used against him just as effectively as steel." Oberyn felt a pang at the mention of his daughters and Illyria. He had already taken steps to ensure their safety, but King's Landing was a web of hidden dangers. "I understand," he said, giving Varys a level look. "You can assure Lord Tywin that if he dares harm them, I will respond in kind." Varys inclined his head. "And that, Prince Oberyn, is precisely why I hope cooler heads will prevail." With that, the Master of Whisperers turned and glided off into the night, leaving Oberyn to wrestle with the gravity of his words. In the weeks that followed, Oberyn's routine became a subtle dance of forging alliances, amassing information, and maintaining enough visibility at court to remind the Lannisters that he was no docile Dornish guest. He sparred occasionally with members of the City Watch or Knights at the training yard, each time drawing a crowd of admirers intrigued by the skill and flair that had felled Gregor Clegane. He also ensured that Ellaria Sand, who found King's Landing stifling, was given the best quarters he could arrange, and discreet bodyguards who would shadow her if she left the keep. Ellaria sometimes expressed a longing to return to the peace of the Water Gardens, far from these courtly intrigues, but Oberyn reassured her they would go home, once he had achieved what needed to be done. During one midday meal in the Great Hall, Oberyn found himself seated near Margaery Tyrell, who spoke with a gentle courtesy that belied her own cunning. "Prince Oberyn," she greeted, offering a sweet smile. "My grandmother has mentioned you often since your duel. Lady Olenna finds you interesting." He smirked slightly at that. "I take it the Queen of Thorns has an opinion on everything in this court." "She does," Margaery replied lightly, "and she is seldom wrong. She told me to keep my eye on you. She says that the Red Viper is not a man to be underestimated, especially by the Lannisters." Oberyn inclined his head. "Your grandmother is wise, but you speak as if you are not bound heart and soul to the crown. Are you not soon to be the queen, betrothed to young Tommen?" Margaery's smile softened. "I am loyal to my future husband, but one can be loyal to the crown without being blind to the complexities at court. House Tyrell has its own interests, just as Dorne does, and we all must find ways to coexist with House Lannister." She paused, then added more quietly, "Perhaps our houses can find common ground if the Lannisters become too inflexible." Oberyn heard the invitation beneath her words. "Perhaps," he answered. "Dorne has long memories, my lady. We have not always found reason to trust those who hold the Iron Throne. But if the Tyrells are amenable to an understanding, we could explore that possibility." Margaery nodded and turned to speak to someone else, leaving Oberyn with much to ponder. The Tyrells held immense resources. Their fertile lands, gold, and armies could challenge the Lannisters if it came to open war. They also had more subtle means of influence: Margaery's marriage to the king, her grandmother's cunning, and the wide network of bannermen. If House Martell and House Tyrell ever joined forces, Tywin would face a formidable opposition. Yet such an alliance would come with its own complexities. Olenna Tyrell was not easily manipulated, nor would the Tyrells surrender their ascendancy in King's Landing. Still, the possibility of an alliance teased at Oberyn's mind, reminding him that the tides of power in Westeros were constantly in flux. Meanwhile, word drifted back that events in the north continued to unravel. The Boltons, newly declared Wardens of the North, faced resistance from loyalists to the Starks. The Ironborn were rumored to be launching raids along the western coast. Even the Vale seemed restless, with rumors swirling about Peter Baelish's machinations. Oberyn gathered these tidbits greedily, aware that a realm in turmoil offered both opportunities and perils. If Tywin Lannister became too embroiled with the North or was forced to intervene elsewhere, that might grant Oberyn more freedom to press for Dornish interests in the south. All the while, Oberyn was not oblivious to the threat of retaliation. On more than one occasion, he detected the presence of suspicious figures lingering outside his quarters or trailing him through the city. Once, Ellaria nearly fell ill after a fine dinner, and Oberyn's paranoia spiked, fearing poison. It turned out to be nothing more than mild food sickness, but the scare was enough to convince him to be even more vigilant. He employed a loyal food taster from Dorne, a young man who had served in the Water Gardens. The gesture might have been seen as paranoid, but in King's Landing, caution was paramount. At night, he found respite in Ellaria's arms, though even those intimate hours were tinged with tension. He would lay awake, listening to the sounds of revelers or foot patrols, imagining Tywin's next move. The Lord of Casterly Rock had not confronted him openly since their exchange in the throne room. Tywin operated best behind layers of plausible deniability, working through subordinates, bribes, and quiet threats. Oberyn was determined not to give him any easy advantage. Eventually, an invitation arrived that piqued Oberyn's interest. A private supper with the Queen of Thorns herself, Lady Olenna Tyrell. The message was carefully worded, delivered by a footman in Tyrell livery, and offered no explicit reason for the meeting. Nonetheless, Oberyn sensed that Olenna rarely asked for an audience without purpose. He made his preparations meticulously, dressing with care in a flowing burgundy tunic embroidered with gold thread, and wearing his sun and spear pendant prominently around his neck. He brought only 2 guards, leaving them stationed outside the designated chamber in the Red Keep's labyrinthine hallways. The chamber itself was smaller than Oberyn expected, more of a drawing room than a grand feast hall. A modest table was set, bearing plates of fruit, cheese, and roast duck, with an elegant but not ostentatious centerpiece of fresh flowers. Olenna Tyrell sat perched on a cushioned chair, decked in green and gold, her wimple framing a face that was both aged and keen. Marjorie was present too, standing beside her grandmother as if to learn from the older woman's counsel. A small number of Tyrell guards stood discreetly near the walls, and a single maid flitted about, pouring wine. Oberyn inclined his head politely. "Lady Olenna, you honor me with this invitation." Olenna gestured for him to sit. "Yes, well, you are the man of the hour, are you not? Everyone in King's Landing prattles on about the mountain's downfall." She waved a hand dismissively. "Come sit. We have matters to discuss, and I'd rather not have to shout up at you." Oberyn took a seat, and Marjorie followed suit, looking poised yet curious. The maid approached with a flagon of rich arbor gold, which Olenna accepted. She took a sip and smacked her lips. "Ah, lovely vintage," she murmured, then eyed Oberyn. "Now, I'm an old woman, and I have little time for subtleties. You want to see Tywin Lannister squirm, and so do I. But I'm also no fool. I know that dancing around Tywin can be as dangerous as dancing on a pit of snakes. So let's be frank. If push comes to shove, where does Dorne stand?" Oberyn understood this was more than idle curiosity. "Dorne stands for its own sovereignty, my lady," he answered. "We have not forgotten our losses in Robert's rebellion. Gregor Clegane's confession only stirs old wounds. But we aren't eager for open war." Olenna set her wine down with a click. "Humph. War is expensive, messy, and rarely ends the way one hopes. But Tywin has a habit of picking fights he is certain to win. You forced him to acknowledge a possibility that he might lose, at least on the field of honor. That alone makes you interesting." She folded her hands in her lap. "We Tyrells are in a complicated dance with the Lannisters. We share the throne through my sweet granddaughter's betrothal, but let's just say we don't always see eye to eye with Lord Tywin's methods." Oberyn glanced at Marjorie, who offered a gentle, knowing smile. He looked back to Olenna. "And what do you propose?" Olenna took another sip of wine. "I propose that if Tywin grows too overbearing, we remind him that the crown's power doesn't solely rest on Lannister gold. The Reach is the breadbasket of the 7 kingdoms. With a snap of our fingers, we could make it quite difficult for him. Dorne has never been conquered by dragons or lions, and your victory gave the realm a taste of Dornish defiance. If by chance we need to align ourselves temporarily, you should know that House Tyrell is open to conversation." Marjorie leaned in. "Our aim, of course, is stability for King Tommen, for the realm," she added demurely, but Oberyn could tell she had her own ambitions. "We would prefer to avoid violence." Oberyn lifted his glass in a small toast. "And I would prefer that Elaya's memory be honored and that Dorne's dignity be restored without mass bloodshed. An alliance, even a quiet understanding, could serve us both." Olenna nodded sagely. "Well said. No need to sign anything in blood. Let's just say we shall keep the channels of communication open. If Lord Tywin tries to take a bigger bite out of us, we'll bite back. And we'll consider letting you do some of the biting as well." A sly grin tugged at Oberyn's lips. "I do have venom to spare." They shared a chuckle, tension offset by the comfortable glow of wine and a sense of mutual interest. From that moment, it was clear an unofficial accord had been struck. Nothing in writing, nothing publicly declared, But a door had opened between House Martell and House Tyrell. If Tywin cornered one of them, the other might offer an outstretched hand. Over the next weeks, Oberyn operated with renewed confidence. He did not flaunt the new understanding, but he used it to strengthen his position. The Tyrells, for their part, subtly supported him in small council debates, occasionally blocking Tywin from railroading legislation that would have disadvantaged Dorne or further entrenched Lannister power. It was all done under the veneer of polite court manners. Cersei fumed at these minor defeats, reading the shift in alliances, while Tywin held his cards close, likely waiting for an opportune moment to strike back. In the meantime, Oberyn's personal life saw fleeting moments of respite. He and Illyria dined together, strolled through the Red Keep gardens, and even attended a lavish banquet hosted by the Tyrells, where music and dancing filled the air. Yet even at such festivities, Oberyn felt an undercurrent of danger, as if at any moment a drunken lord might hurl an insult or a hidden blade. After all, killing the Mountain had also robbed many Lannister bannermen of a sense of invincibility, and resentments festered.